So lately, we've been hearing about a big PlayStation acquisition that is apparently happening behind the scenes. Now we're hearing that whatever this acquisition is, if it does turn out to be real, is bigger than Kojima Productions. So this has once again led to a lot of different conversations about Sony potentially trying to acquire a major publisher, which is certainly plausible. We saw that they acquired Bungie and they continue to acquire smaller studios, but Microsoft acquired Bethesda, and not too long after, they acquired Activision Blizzard, or they are still in the process of acquiring them. And it's been made clear that the industry is consolidating at a pretty rapid rate, and that will continue over the months and years. And we talked before about how it would be wise for Sony to kind of get involved in this in a significant way. I think that the idea of Sony making a larger strategic acquisition of a publisher would not be the most surprising thing. It wouldn't be the most shocking at this point in time. So what I wanted to do is go over this list that was compiled by a Reddit user over on the Gaming Leaks and Rumors subreddit, where they run down every major publisher and they talk about where they stand essentially when it comes to the likelihood of PlayStation acquiring them. And I figured, since many people continue to talk about this and speculate about it, and they continue to throw out different publisher names, maybe after we go over this, we'll have a much better idea of, realistically speaking, who would be the most likely purchase or the most likely publisher to want to be purchased by PlayStation. What would make the most sense? So before we dive into this, do me a big favor, guys. Be sure to hit the like button to help the video out and show your support. And if you are new here to the channel, make sure you hit the subscribe button as well. So heading over to the Gaming Leaks and Rumors subreddit, this was underneath a post that talks about the acquisition apparently being bigger than Kojima Productions. And we have the individual Theogamda who compiled this list. And so we're going to read over it here, and they say my takes on the available publishers, including their approximate market cap, starting with Westerns. And he starts here with EA. Now, I've seen, believe it or not, quite a few people say that Sony should try to acquire EA. They would be worth about $35 billion. And they say here, very expensive, and would likely need to keep their biggest games multi-platform since they are more sports focused. Don't think this would be viable. And I have to agree with this. I think EA is one of the most unlikely candidates for a Sony acquisition. Not only is it tremendously expensive for Sony and also very risky, but yeah, most of these games would have to be multi-plat. I just don't think this is a move that Sony would make. Now, next up, they mention Take-Two Interactive, worth about $15 billion, but Zynga is also worth $10 billion. Announced the purchase, or maybe it was a merge of Zynga in the start of the year. I really don't think they would even consider selling themselves right now, and it would be an expensive purchase. This is another publisher that I've seen thrown around a lot, that being Take-Two Interactive, Sony getting GTA and everything else that goes with Take-Two Interactive. But not only do we have to take into account that they did just acquire Zynga, but yeah, I think that not only would it be too expensive, it's likely that Take-Two Interactive doesn't want to sell. And it's also likely that EA probably doesn't want to sell either, now that I'm thinking about it. Next up, they talk about Ubisoft, which is worth around $5 billion. PlayStation Studios already makes better open world titles than Ubisoft, and while some of their franchises are famous and sell well, I don't think they would add much value to PlayStation, and their studio structure seems to be a bit different, so it could be the case that interfering in the studios to improve would be more difficult. On the other hand, their stock has fallen a lot over the course of last year. So they don't really say here whether or not they think it's likely, but I'm going to be upfront. I don't think Ubisoft is likely. I think the fact that Sony seemingly does certain Ubisoft formulas better than Ubisoft is the exact reason why there would be no need for them to acquire them. It is worth noting that they would get some valuable IP, and maybe Sony could do some things with that, but I just don't see Ubisoft being a viable option for Sony. If we found out that Sony was trying to acquire Ubisoft, that would be kind of a shocker to me. I just don't see that happening. I don't think that Ubisoft would be a good fit with Sony. I just don't see it. Now, he moves on to Japanese publishers, and I think that this is what PlayStation players are more interested in, because the likelihood of Sony acquiring a Japanese publisher just seems higher than anything outside of it. So we have up first Bandai Namco, which is worth about $16 billion. And they say, I think they mostly deal with licensed games, and no, they wouldn't get from software with this. Plus, they are expensive. So keeping it short and simple, yeah, I don't think Bandai Namco is going to happen either. I think there is a bit of confusion. People think that if Sony were to acquire Bandai Namco for 16 billion, well, it would be a pretty expensive acquisition, that's for sure. They do, in fact, deal mostly with licensed games, or at least a lot of licensed games, and they would not be getting from software, which I think would be not seen as a good thing necessarily if Sony were to spend that amount of money on a publisher. So I don't think Bandai Namco is likely. Now they move on to Konami, which is another publisher that many of us have been talking about because it does seem like it would be a good fit for Sony. They say here that they are worth about $8 billion. That is the entire holding. According to Wikipedia, their gaming division has 1,839 employees versus 10,454 employees within the whole holding. They haven't released many games as of lately, so if Sony were to buy them, it would be for their IPs alone, and they would need to interfere in the studios to make them develop the games Sony wants. And I also don't think Sony would buy the whole company. I think the only possibility would be if Konami wanted to sell their gaming division and just that. So it would be lower than $8 billion. If anyone knows how much each division makes, comment below. So we don't know that information, at least not on hand right here. But this one is pretty interesting because we've talked at length about Konami, and I've said it before, it really wouldn't make much sense for Sony to try to acquire all of Konami. It just doesn't really fit with Sony's goals and ambitions, but there's no doubt that Sony has some very valuable IP that could be leveraged not just in the gaming space, but also outside the gaming space as well, which is something that Sony is very interested in. And, at this point in time, I don't know the likelihood that Konami would be willing to sell either their IP or their gaming division to Sony, but at the very least, I could see, if not an acquisition, some type of deal struck. This is something, again, we've been speculating on for what feels like years now, and we still have yet to hear anything. So there's a good chance that Konami is not doing anything with Sony. But yeah, if Sony could get their IP in some way or their gaming division, I think that that would be a very good move, and I think that that would benefit Sony and gamers greatly because Konami just doesn't really seem to be doing much of anything these days. But again, it kind of comes down to Konami and their willingness, and I just don't see them as very willing to do anything like that. Now, next up, we have Capcom, which would be worth around $5 billion. Would be a great purchase in this individual's opinion, but they are doing well right now, so they might not be willing to sell. But franchises like Resident Evil, Devil May Cry, Monster Hunter are really popular, and you can also make movies on them. They also complement Sony's first-party current lineup very well in terms of genres, and they also say here, I do think this one is one of the most realistic though. And I have to say that after reading this, I kind of came to the realization that yeah, Capcom would be a perfect fit for Sony when you look at what Sony is trying to achieve in their company right now, not just with PlayStation in the gaming space, but what this individual points out is very true. They have some very well-known popular franchises that would certainly complement what Sony and their studios already make. Games like Resident Evil and whatnot, and Devil May Cry, Monster Hunter, they would be able to make movies. I mean, they're already making movies for these franchises. So this is one of those acquisitions that I actually do agree. I think this is one of the most likely and most realistic. But the writer here says that, look, they are doing very well right now. They're in a very good position. So the need for them to feel like they would have to be acquired or sell is not high right now. So that could be something that gets in the way. Next up, we have Square Enix, which is worth around $5 billion. They continue by saying, in my opinion, this one is the most realistic because Square isn't doing as great as Capcom, so they might be more willing, and they have famous AAA JRPGs that still do well in the West: Final Fantasy, Kingdom Hearts, Dragon Quest. They have an MMO that is really, I think they meant to say popular right now. So this includes expertise in live service, and they have their Western studios, which are also good. And yeah, I have to say Square Enix is one of the most likely acquisitions for Sony. The only argument I've made against this is that their partnership and relationship with Square Enix is so strong as it is, it almost makes you wonder, like, would Sony even feel the need to have to own them and acquire them, considering how willing Square Enix is to work so closely with Sony? Um, it's hard to say. I mean, I could see it both ways. I could see why Sony wouldn't want to acquire them because of that, but I could also see it how maybe they would just want to lock it up entirely and be like, look, we're already so close. Let's just make this thing a done deal. And what they point out here, yeah, it's true that, Final Fantasy, Kingdom Hearts, Dragon Quest, having many AAA JRPGs, having a popular MMO. We know that Sony is all about the live service right now. So yeah, that would make sense. Next up, they have Sega, where they say $4 billion, the entire holding. While Sony likes their Persona exclusivity, and I would bet they would try to make some exclusivity deal for Persona 6, I think Sega developers are more niche and some more PC-focused titles. Also, they like Konami. Sega is holding deals and other stuff, so they're basically pointing out that it's not just gaming here when it comes to Sega. And they say that they think Sega's unlikely, and I agree. I wouldn't really know how to feel if Sony acquired Sega. I don't think many people really know exactly how to feel. That would definitely be out of left field, and I don't think anybody's anticipating that. I just don't see Sega as a viable option, even though they are Japanese. I just don't see it happening. Now, they add one more here, that being for Katakawa Corporation. They would be worth $3 billion for the entire holding. With this, Sony would get From Software and Spike Chunsoft, and getting the former would be huge. However, Katakawa is a holding that operates in different sectors, but they are mostly related to manga and visual films, it seems, which might have some intersection with other sectors of Sony. We don't know if Sony actually wants to buy the holding. This person finds it unlikely, and From Software is surely valuable right now. I doubt they would sell just the studio, and I wouldn't be surprised if Bandai Namco, tried to merge with them in the case that Sony was trying to buy the company. And so, yeah, this is another one we've talked about, Sony acquiring From Software. I do agree. I do not think Katakawa would just sell From Software. They're way too valuable now. And there is talk of something stopping this potential acquisition of the entirety of Katakawa. It would be a difficult merger for sure, but they would benefit greatly in like the anime area. But it would actually get to a point where, ironically enough, Sony could potentially be looking at a monopoly within the anime area here, and so that would probably stop them from doing this. And so that is the list of studios here. And again, I thought this individual did a pretty good job talking about this in a realistic way and kind of presenting each publisher. And at this point, I think the three most likely publishers that Sony could try to do something with in a really significant way and potentially even try to acquire them are from most likely to least likely. I think Capcom is the most likely. I do, because as popular as Final Fantasy, Kingdom Hearts, and these games are, and as as good as the relationship is between Square Enix and Sony, I still think Capcom would be the one that Sony would want to go after, because games like Resident Evil, Devil May Cry, Monster Hunter, I think that these games kind of, I don't know, to me, they just kind of fit under PlayStation better. Like, I just have this feeling that these games appeal more to PlayStation. I could be wrong about that, but I think Capcom is the most likely. I think Square Enix is the second most likely, and I think Konami is the third. I want to say that Konami is the number one, but when you look at the entire company as a whole and you realize that there's a lot more to it, with Sony, if Sony were to try to acquire them, yeah, I think Konami is still up there and likely, but I think Capcom and Square Enix are probably the two most viable that Sony would try to go for. Outside of that, I do think that all of the other studios we mentioned, maybe except like EA and Take-Two, I do not think they're realistic at all. I think they're possibilities, but not necessarily likely. So, yeah, that's pretty much where we stand right now. Again, I want to make it known that this is pure speculation, and I figured we could just go over this list because the reality is Sony may have no intention of buying a publisher, and there are actually quite a few people who believe that there's no way Sony is going to try to buy a publisher. And I think it's like a 50-50 thing. I think if you're somebody who says, no, that's just not something Sony's going to do, they have no interest in that, they're just going to focus on kind of smaller studios or studios that really make more sense for them, I think that's completely believable and certainly plausible. But I also do believe that maybe, yeah, Sony would want to try to at least get one publisher if possible, if industry consolidation is really going to be, as intense as it seems like it's going to be in the coming years. So we'll have to remain patient and see, but there's no doubt in my mind that Sony will be announcing more acquisitions throughout this year, and we'll just have to kind of see what they end up being. But that does it for the video, guys. I hope you did enjoy it. I hope you did find it informative. If you did, leave it a like, subscribe if you're new, hit the bell notification icon, and feel free to share this video out on top of all that. But until next time, guys, take care.